Senator Rand Paul is part of this gang of 12 that want to shut down the government and starve all little children and have teachers replaced with bats. And
crumbling
all
bridges.
Of the schools will be in.
You heard him talk about crumbling bridges.
Well, that's
too.
because all the schools will be taught under bridges by bats.
Yeah.
And then the bridges will crumble and kill all of our children. That's how evil of a man he is. Either that or he just thinks that some unconstitutional things are happening and he doesn't want to shut down the government. He just wants to defund a wildly already out of control government program. The universal health care program of the president, and I think this is our last chance. This is our last chance. He has a book that's come out in paperback, Government Bullies, How Everyday Americans Are Being Harassed, Abused, and Imprisoned by the Feds. It's a stunning excoriation of what our country has become, and he is on the phone with us now. Senator, how are you, sir?
Good. Glad to be with you, Glenn.
So, Chris Christie...
Oh, don't get me started.
Has said, and he's not alone, that there's a rising strain of libertarianism and that you are dangerous.
Now, you've seen me, Glenn. I'm not that dangerous. I'm not even scary.
You're really not.
The thing is that here's the real problem with their analysis is that I believe the most important thing we do at the federal government level, the thing that is absolutely authorized by the Constitution, is national defense. And then it takes a priority over really just about everything we do up there. So I would, if I were in charge, do everything possible to find savings in order to preserve national defense. However, if you're a liberal Republican and you think you want all the pork everywhere that all the Democrats want and you want national defense, it's a little bit hard to argue because there's no money left over for national defense unless you're willing to cut somewhere.
I was shocked in two things. First of all, that Newt Gingrich over the weekend was as honest as he was. He claimed that he was a neocon, and Newt is enough of a wordsmith to know exactly the origins of that word. That means somebody who is a big government progressive liberal that also believes in huge national defense and spreading democracy by force. And that's what a definition of a neocon is. And he said, I am a neocon, but I've started to reconsider maybe some of our national defense stuff is misguided here.
Well, see, I think part of the problem is we characterize things too absolutely. I always tell people there are two poles. One is that we're everywhere all the time, and one is that we're nowhere any of the time. That would be isolationism. I'm not for nowhere any of the time. I'm for defending the country, protecting the country from attackers. I was for going into Afghanistan. I'm for having a robust presence around the world. But I'm not for being in every civil war. I'm not for arming the Islamic rebels in Syria who are going to be killing and are killing Christians. And so there are debates, but what happens is the other side wants to characterize one side as not believing and defending the country, and that's just not accurate.
So we've had prison break after prison break. You know, if you look at Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood as two rival gangs, which they are, they're the Crips and the Bloods, except they're even worse than the Crips and the Bloods, obviously. And we're not anti-gang. We just pick the Bloods. We just don't like the Crips. And so we've gone after Al-Qaeda, but we've embraced the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is crumbling in the Middle East and in Egypt. And now Al-Qaeda is releasing prisoners by opening up all of the prisons across the Middle East. And now we've taken this unprecedented act of shutting down our embassies all across the region. Rand, I've never seen America do this. Al-Qaeda's not on the run. We're on the run.
Well, I still have questions about whether we're adequately protecting our embassies, and I think it really was inexcusable in Benghazi that when Hillary Clinton was asked for more security, she turned them down and then had the gall to say, oh, really wasn't my problem. Somebody underneath me made that decision. And I really think that kind of behavior is inexcusable. And still to this day, they're talking this morning all over the news about how Benghazi's 10 times more dangerous than it was. I think the whole country, I think the host country, there may be people there who are willing to protect our embassy, but I don't think they have the capability. So I don't think we really should have an embassy there under State Department control. It actually ought to be under military control the way initially things were in Afghanistan and in Iraq, or we shouldn't have an embassy in Libya at all. But you do have to protect your embassies, and shutting them down is not an ultimate answer. I don't want to second-guess the decision yesterday because I don't have all the information, but I do say we have to have more protection for our embassies.
I don't want to put you in a situation to where you're speculating on, whether this is genuine, whether this is just another, this is a scare tactic to get everybody not talking about Benghazi, which we were again last week, or supporting the NSA or anything like that. What I just want to ask you is, how should the American people digest what's going on with this giant terror scare?
I think that you can have both security and privacy and obey the Bill of Rights. They make it out like, we need these short steps. We don't need warrants. We need to be able to get all of this information from Americans and store it out in Utah. But the thing is almost really every case that they've said, was stopped by using the surveillance, it really isn't exactly true. Every name of every person that they started their investigation with all came from an informant and came with an actual name. They aren't just using and able to use this data to find terrorists. They're working from information they get from informants, and then they could do it the traditional way and just ask for judges' warrants for their phone records and whoever they link to, and we would be able to get terrorists and still would, even without, disobeying the Fourth Amendment and invading all Americans' privacy.
I have respect for Michelle Bachmann, but we have respectfully parted ways on the NSA thing. She is convinced that the NSA has never done anything wrong and, got to work with the evidence at hand, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know why you are building the biggest data collection center on the world has ever seen if you're not actually going to store any of that data. But what is your reaction to the House's failure to defund the NSA?
Actually, I was pretty impressed with the effort because, first of all, leadership on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, didn't want to have a vote, and they forced the vote and actually almost worked to put controls on the NSA. The problem with not having any controls and expecting the NSA or policemen in general just to pass their own rules, it's sort of like the presidential problem. People who have power think that because they're good, there don't need to be limits on it. So policemen who are good people, I know policemen in my community, I know FBI agents, they're good people, but they don't want restrictions outside of their group because they think it just sort of gets in the way of doing work. But increasingly they want more and more power because they say we're good people and we're going to do good things. But then ultimately so much power accumulates that then like people in the IRS are able to use that power against their political enemies. Could the NSA be turned on your enemies? Absolutely.
Congress is on break right now, but when you come back, there is a push that you're involved in to defund universal health care by carving it out of the next continuing resolution. Already, they're calling everybody involved an extremist. I personally think that if this would work, you would not only defund President's health care plan and stop it dead in its tracks, I really, truly believe you would see John McCain walk out of the GOP and say, I'm going to do Joe Lieberman. I'm an independent because this party has been taken over by extremists, and that would be the biggest victory of all. How is the defunding program coming, in your opinion?
Well, but for a few Republicans who have been critical of it before it got started, I think it would have had more success. What I tell people is that when I come home Kentucky, everybody's exactly the way they were in 2010. They want us to do something to defund Obamacare. Medicare is $35 to $40 trillion in the hole, and taking money from Medicare to pay for Obamacare just isn't going to work. And they want us to do something. We control a third of the government, which means we may not be able to win, but they want us to stand up and try. And if you control a third of the government, shouldn't you use that leverage to at least get rid of some of Obamacare or try to get rid of some of it? You start out with defunding the whole thing, but maybe we just get it delayed. I don't know what the final outcome is because I can't guarantee victory, but I can guarantee you get nothing if you don't try. And that's why I think Republicans are hungry for leadership in our party to say, somebody stand up to the president, somebody stand up to Obamacare and do something.
I saw a story from a progressive Democrat that said, after this is funded, if you guys lose this fight, and once this thing is funded and on its way, the Tea Party and small government conservatives are over. And they said that it is really one of the last stands here. And it's a real fight it's a fight against American constitutionalists and progressives on both sides.
Yeah, but I think the fight doesn't end, because I've told people, even if we lose this fight on funding it, there's going to be another fight within a year when all the bills come due at the state legislative level, because they don't have a printing press at the state capitol. And so they will have bills, and they're going to be enormous for this thing. And I think also there's going to be a rebellion among the people when they see how much their premiums are. And that, guess what? They had insurance before, but they lose their doctor, lose their insurance, and they're paying more for their premiums. They're going, now, why did I vote for the president on this?
Do you think they're going to add fuel to the fire, do you think there's going to be a real movement to bail out Detroit?
I think there may, and I've been talking with my staff about having a Republican alternative to it, because I think there is a way in an economically depressed zone to have some tax forbearance, reduce some taxes, encourage businesses, encourage people to come in and take abandoned property. The other thing I suggested is the money we're sending to Egypt for tanks and planes, we could put it into infrastructure. It doesn't have to go just to Detroit, but across America, it would go into repairing infrastructure. And so I think there are ways that we could do it in a Republican fashion, but I will not be for borrowing any money, from China to try to bail out Detroit, particularly if they continue the same policies. Really, bankruptcy is an opportunity to try to get rid of bad contracts, start out afresh, and try to maybe pay your workers, have fewer workers, but pay them closer to what the market pays them in the private sector.
I will tell you that, the boys were talking about, we could buy homes, Glenn. We could buy a home for $1. We could buy a whole block for 10. And they were talking about there, some people are going in and buying, lots of houses, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, I wouldn't do it, because I'm not convinced that I wouldn't be held responsible or liable now for all of the bad decisions that city makes. You have to have a fresh start. If you had a fresh start, new money would pour in there. And people would say, I've got an idea. I know how we can do this. I know how we can fix this. I know how we can turn it around. But who's going to do that?
It would bring in new politics, too, that maybe the people who have been voting for the Democrats for 50 years in Detroit, who ran the once great city into the ground, maybe they'd choose some new leadership, and the Republican Party would have a resurgence in Detroit, and we could say, look, we have the ability and the ideas to bring forward a recovery for Detroit, but that may be wishful thinking.
Yeah, I think that's wishful thinking. What I think is a possibility, not now, but what is a possibility, is to get entrepreneurs, libertarians, smallest possible government, the kind of guys that are doing the cutting edge ideas of, what is that sea thing that they have that big ship out in sea, and they're like, we're going to try to redesign everything. I mean, you have some real libertarian thinkers, some real big money, and some entrepreneurs come in there and say, all bets are off. We want this property to try something entirely different. That, I think, could excite the minds and imaginations of Americans. And if you just said, look, I own it, and that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to take care of it and police it myself, and we're going to try some new experiment, that would capture imagination.
You've hit on it, because what you have to have is not only tax-free zones, you need to have regulation-free zones. Apparently, Detroit, there's 46 pages of regulations for setting up a business, and everywhere you go, you're paying off somebody or paying a legalized bribe to get your business license. You have to eliminate all that red tape, and so it has to be a low-tax or a tax-free zone and a regulation-free zone, and just do it because it's blighted, and see if people will come in if you tell them they can just open their business and start tomorrow.
Well, the name of the book is Government Bullies, How Everyday Americans Are Being Harassed, Abused, and Imprisoned by the Feds. And if you ever have a friend who says, oh, tell me where the rights have gone away, you just give him this book. It's available now in paperback everywhere. Government Bullies by Senator Rand Paul, out today in paperback in stores everywhere. Thanks so much, Senator.
Thanks, Glenn.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.